Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Wendy Peart, and I am the Curator of Education at Dunlop Art Gallery. Welcome to tonight's event with John Peet and guest Julia Krueger. Tonight, John is going to speak to us about his current exhibition at Sherwood Gallery until July 11th at Dunlop Art Gallery in Regina, Saskatchewan, Treaty 4 territory. Before we begin, I would like to do a land acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge that we are currently situated in Treaty 4 territory, the traditional lands of the Cree, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. Through this land acknowledgement, I'd like to extend my intentions and efforts to continually improve my relationship with the Indigenous people that have lived on this land forever. Through this work I do at the Dunlop Art Gallery, for example, I hope to bring communities together through learning and education, to provide opportunities to learn from one another and become closer together in respect and honor. So let's get started. As we get started, what will happen tonight is John will complete his artist talk, and then Julia will join us after that for conversation and to answer any questions that the audience members might have. If you have a question or a comment, please enter those into the comments field on whatever platform you're on, if it's on YouTube or Facebook. And we will get to those when it works well for the talk, and maybe might be at the end. So I'm just going to introduce John before we get started. John Peet was born in St. John's, Newfoundland, and raised in Montreal, Quebec. After moving to Regina, Saskatchewan in 1977, he began working in ceramics, exhibiting and marketing his work. He received his BFA from the University of Regina in 1994 and worked at the Mackenzie Art Gallery for 18 years. So now we'll get started. Sorry about that, everybody. John, you're currently muted, and I would like you to try to unmute your mic. Okay, did you try that? Sorry for the inconvenience, everyone. We're just working out a technical consideration. John, if I could get you, can you hear me, John? Can you unmute yourself, John, please? John, can you hear me? Okay, just we apologize. I apologize, everyone. We are just working out a technical difficulty.
Hello, can you hear me?
Okay, now I can hear you.
I lost my audio again.
Okay, your audio is very low, though.
I'm just going to go and check the input settings.
Okay, please do check the input. Sorry, audience. Stay with us just one moment.
Can you say something?
I can still hear you, but I don't believe it's coming through your mic that you want. Unless you're able to speak very loudly.
I'm going to change to the other headset. I have it here beside me.
Okay.
Okay, can you say something?
It's still not the correct mic. It's still, I can hear you, but it's through your computer mic. So if you could change your headset mic to your headset mic. Here, let me see if I can. No, I can't. One moment, please, audience. We are just working out a strange technical difficulty. We had everything ready to go right at the beginning. It was all working perfectly. And now somehow
You're hearing me okay, though.
I'm still hearing you. We might just have to go forth with that, with what we've got right now. I think it's just working through your computer audio. But John, if you do not mind projecting a little bit more, we can work with this. Okay, we have, I have someone saying they can hear you. They can hear me. So I'm hoping others can hear. Can you try speaking again, John, and just see? John? Can you hear me, John?
I'm so sorry about this.
John, can you hear me at all?
If you can hear me okay, why don't I just go ahead with my talk?
Okay, but can you hear me?
If that works for you.
Okay.
Nothing at all.
Oh, that's just so, okay. You can't hear us. I don't know how this is going to work. If you can't hear Julia when we come on, I don't know what would have happened that it caused this problem.
One more thing to try here.
Okay. But I believe it's in your settings in the StreamYard as we worked out previously. Remember last time we did you edited your mic settings and your audio settings? No? Okay, I'm going to give this one more minute and then we'll go forth with the artist talk and then we'll.
No, that didn't work either. So again, my apologies, but if it's okay and you're hearing me all right, maybe I'll go ahead and do the talk part.
Okay, just to remember to project.
And then we could do the questions through the chat.
Okay. Okay, we will begin then. We'll get started. Okay.
Okay, again, my apologies. Technology isn't my strong suit, and for some reason my headphones cut out there. Before I get started on my grandfather's pictures, I'd like to say I'm sorry that unfortunately I had to cancel the talk last week because my mother died a week ago Sunday. And before I start, I'd like to relate a couple of quick stories about my mother. The first took place in 1967 when I was 11 years old and living in Montreal. That was the year of Canada's centennial, and Montreal was hosting a World's Fair. It was Expo 67. That year, my mother took me to visit the Visual Arts Pavilion at Expo. And coming from a family with 6 kids and only 7 years between the oldest and the youngest, this was a real treat to be able to have an outing with mom on your own and spend time with her on your own. While there, I saw a sculpture by Rodin. It was The Burghers of Calais, and I was extremely moved by their work. It was the first time I remember having an emotional reaction to a piece of visual art, and I can still picture that sculpture today. The second event was a couple of years later when I was 13 or 14 on a trip home to Newfoundland. My mom took me to an exhibit of paintings by Christopher Pratt. It was at the Arts and Culture Center in St. John's. I reacted very strongly to those paintings. They captured a sense of melancholy and longing that I had associated with Newfoundland, and it was something I wasn't seeing reflected in the popular culture at the time. These two visits to see visual arts that my mother had facilitated in my early life had a major impact on my relationship with art and influenced the direction my life would take. So I'd like to thank you, Mom. Now we'll go on with my grandfather's pictures. My grandfather's picture, I'll just go back one there, Wendy, if you don't mind. The other way. My grandfather's pictures is a exhibition that contains 2 ceramic installations, Leaving Ireland and Mount Cashel. The young man you see in this photograph is my grandfather in 1912, soon after he arrived in Newfoundland, and the drawing is a drawing he did of the orphanage at that time. Now we can go ahead. Because this show is somewhat autobiographical, I guess I get to talk a little bit about myself. I was born in Newfoundland, St. John's, in 1956, the third of 6 children. I'd say a large Catholic family, but really 6 kids at that time wasn't particularly large. In 1960, my family moved to Montreal, and we can see the next picture there. So if we can move ahead, Wendy, in the images. So this is a picture of my family soon after we came to Montreal, and I'm kind of the curly-headed kid in the middle there. I was part of the Anglophone exodus from Quebec in the late 1970s, and I came to Regina in 77. In the spring of 78, I started pottery classes at the University of Regina Extension Department. I focused on porcelain stoneware functional pieces, and we can move ahead here. Yeah, I think, Wendy, the slides should all be in the right order to just run through them, one after the other. I think the next image is a porcelain bottle. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I think they should all follow in order from here on, Wendy. So this is a porcelain bottle with a Tamacru glaze. The next image is a stoneware casserole. I soon got the clay bug, and I quit my job at the university print shop and started working as the technician in the Extension Ceramic Studio. The last picture of work from this time now is another porcelain piece with a crackle glaze. In 1983, I moved to Fort Capel to set up a pottery studio and shop. And we can go to the next picture. Yeah, that's it. I was a little bit younger then. Now, it was during this time that I was struggling with coming to terms with my own sexual orientation and reconciling that with my Catholic faith. In the mid-'80s, it was the height of the AIDS crisis. And I became involved with AIDS Regina. It was a very difficult time to come out as a gay person. I was involved with people with AIDS, arts education, and political action. I was challenged by the pushback we were getting from some in the church for the work we were doing. In the late 1980s, the scandal at Mount Cashel Orphanage in Newfoundland broke. And this is an image of the orphanage. My grandfather had come to Mount Cashel as an Irish orphan in 1912. The orphanage has been part of my family mythology. The scandal focused on police investigation and a cover-up that occurred in the 70s. It was revealed that widespread physical and sexual abuse had been perpetrated on the boys, primarily by the clergy at the orphanage. Both church and state had collaborated to cover up the abuse and offered no support or compassion to the victims while protecting the perpetrators. This for me was a point where I could no longer continue as a practicing Catholic. In 1988, my life took a major shift when I went to the Gambia in West Africa as a CUSO volunteer. I worked with a women's pottery co-op. I think you'll find a couple more pictures from Africa here, Wendy. Now, when I returned to Regina in 1990, I rented studio space and started working in earthenware. Here are two images of covered jars that I created during this time. Also in 1990, I enrolled in the BFA program at the University of Regina. I studied with Jack Sears and Vic Sikansky. I graduated in 1994 with a BFA. My graduating exhibition is in the next image, and it was an installation of 1,000 bowls. This piece was based on a Zen Buddhist concept that reflected my own relationship with clay. The work uses the repetition of motion. If you threw 1,000 bowls, you would have one perfect bowl. You're capturing the perfect act of throwing, and it must be a fluid and natural act and not labored or contrived. This particular image is not of the original installation that was at the Mackenzie Art Gallery, but a second time I installed the piece, which I much preferred. For me, it referenced the stone beaches of Newfoundland. In 1993, I also participated in a two-person show at the Art Gallery of Regina with my friend Jamie Slingerland. Water was the theme of the show. We each created 2 ceramic murals, and together we built a fountain in the gallery. We wanted to get the sound of water into the space. My work was inspired by my time in Africa and the importance of the access to water in the region that I was living. After graduation, I shared a studio with Tara David Driscoll and exhibited for several years. And then the call of a stable income became too strong, and I got a job at the Mackenzie Art Gallery. I thought if I worked for 6 years, I'd be able to pay off my house and I could go back to the studio full time. I ended up staying at the gallery for 18 years. Although I worked in several jobs over my years at the gallery, it was working as installation officer and curatorial project manager that I found the most rewarding. I worked closely with artists and curators to realize their visions and communicate them to the audience. When I left the Mackenzie, I rented a studio space at the U of R for the summer and started showing again. These are some of the first works I did, and I was revisiting the theme of ceramic bowls inspired by beach stones. The next image shows a piece I was working on. I was very interested in the concept of ceramic garnitures. Now this brings us to my current body of work and this exhibition. A few years ago, my husband and I decided it was time to downsize our large historic home. We felt we needed a much more manageable place to live in. We started sorting through our belongings and came across a box of old family photos and memorabilia. Amongst the photos were these images belonging to my grandfather. They're from Mount Cashel Orphanage and date between 1912 and 1916. And I think here, Wendy, there are several images you can just scroll through as I talk here from the orphanage. Viewing these images triggered for me the emotions I had felt in the 80s. I had long wanted to address this history in some kind of piece. But it was a challenge as a potter to find a way to speak to these issues through my work. I needed to develop the ideas, the format of the piece, and the techniques I required to execute it. As I spent more time with the box of family images, several other ideas for works developed. I am now planning to create a total of 5 ceramic installations inspired by the images. The Mount Cashel piece took over 3 years to complete, and I worked on other pieces while it was developing. The first to be exhibited was Forgotten, an installation of 12 plates you see here. This piece was selected for the Saskatchewan Craft Council Biennial Juried Exhibition, Dimensions 2019, and was awarded the Most Outstanding Entry. It's currently being acquired by Sask Arts for their permanent collection. Now here, this image is the one that inspired the final work for the Mount Cashel piece. The work consists of an 18-foot refractory table laid with 18 settings, each with a plate, a bowl, and a beaker. So we could go to the next image here. The story of this piece begins with the death of my great-grandparents in Ireland. When my great-grandfather died on Christmas Day in 1907, 20 months after his wife's death, he left behind 9 children between the ages of 2 and 20. 6 or 7 of the younger children were sent to different institutions throughout Ireland. My grandfather went to the Antrim Boys Industrial School in Dublin. In 1912, he accompanied one of the brothers who was being transferred to Mount Cashel Orphanage in Newfoundland. Now, my mother was only 11 years old when her father died, so I never knew him. But I grew up with stories of his life and the orphanage. These were not negative stories, but romantic images of his life. The piece also includes 6 benches. Each of these has been carved with text that's taken from the transcripts of the Hughes inquiry into the abuse at the orphanage. I started this work by throwing the ceramic pieces, and I think that's next, Wendy. Then I carved the Celtic knot patterns around the rings. I used Photoshop to format the images, and then a laser jet printer to create photo transfer ceramic decals. I also created textured decal sheets that I cut into individual segments for the Celtic knot. Once these ceramic elements were completed, I needed to build the tables and the benches. The tops of the benches are carved with the text from the Hughes inquiry, and I've selected texts that address the cover-up and the lack of compassion shown the boys by the church and state. I have tried to avoid descriptions of the acts of abuse because I feel in some way they may re-victimize the boys. What I want to focus on in this work is the way as a society we fail these children, and we fail to protect them and allowed this circumstance to continue for so long. And now we can keep going through the images till we come to leaving Ireland. Each place setting, I've tried to select parts of a single image for the plate, the bowl, and the beaker. The second work in this exhibition is Leaving Ireland. In this work, I've used my grandfather's family photos from before his parents' death, images of him soon after he arrived in Newfoundland, cards that were sent to him in his early years in Newfoundland, as well as the funeral cards from his parents. I've incorporated these images in the ceramic furniture that I've mounted on a mantelpiece. Now, the latest piece in this series is being exhibited right now. The title of the piece is In the Company of Friends, and it's currently on display in Saskatoon at the Saskatchewan Craft Council Gallery. It's part of the Dimensions 2021 jewelry exhibition. In this work, I've incorporated images from a photo album my grandfather kept in the 1920s. And what I'm playing with in this piece is I'm taking images and cropping them, manipulating them, and then repeating them as bands around the pot. What I'd like to have the viewer react to is a sense of a pattern on the piece. And as they look closer, they realize that these are photographs, and the photographs, images have their own impact as well. Now, there are many people I'd like to thank for their support in the development for the exhibition. Among them are the University of Regina Summer Artist Residency Program, Sask Arts Independent Artist Program, as well as their acquisition of my works with permanent collection, the Medalta Artist Residency in Medicine Hat, and finally the Dunlop Art Gallery, and especially Wendy for the great curatorial work she's done on the show, and for Jeff Meldrum and the installation crew for the wonderful job they did on the installation. Thank you.
Thank you, John, for that talk. Again, apologies for the sound issue. I just want everyone to know that we will continue with this discussion, but there is a bit of a technical workaround that we'll have to do with John so that he can hear Julia's questions. So please be patient as we transcribe some of the questions directly to John. So right now I'm just going to do an introduction of Julia. Julia Krueger was born and raised in Regina, Saskatchewan. She studied art history and Canadian art history at Carleton University in Ottawa, Ontario. She received her BFA with highest honors and her master's thesis, Prairie Pots and Beyond, an examination of Saskatchewan ceramics from the 1960s to the present, was accepted in 2006 with distinction. In 2010, Julia completed a BFA in ceramics at Alberta College of Art and Design in Calgary, Alberta, where she collaborated on many projects with her sister, Yolande Krueger. Okay, so I'm going to remove myself from the field. I'll be working a few things from the back end so that we can translate through this technology. One moment.
Wendy, I'm just going to paste in the first question because I have them typed out. So let's give that a try. So I'll paste.
How about paste all of them in and maybe just do what you were going to do. Just do your plan. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, we'll try it out. So hi, everyone, and thank you, John, for letting me ask you some questions today and for the opportunity to write about your work. I've been a big fan of your work for a long time. So the first question that I have for you is, for leaving Ireland, you have a beautiful celadon glaze on the vessels, and on Mount Cashel, you have a warm yellow tone glazed. Why are they different?
Thank you. I'm so sorry about this. I believe the difference, why I chose the different glazes, is I have a real affinity for celadons, and I've used them a lot through my career. And I do believe they fit in the time frame of the work that I'm relating to, the sort of Victorian era as well, and fit that piece. The yellow glaze I used on the Mount Cashel piece, I thought had a more utilitarian feel in some ways, not as fancy as a celadon, and might be something more likely to be found in an institution like that. I found it, when I fired it with the decals on, it kind of, in some places, got a rougher texture, but I liked that in the end. I felt it suited the piece. So I chose the glazes to fit the particular piece.
I noticed that too, and I found it to be really great. For everyone, I'm just typing this in for John. I noticed the rougher texture as well and loved it. So, and what it made me think of when I noticed the rougher texture was that idea of the degrading of the photograph. I know John can't hear me right now, but that was something that I found really interesting. One of those happy accidents that happened during the process of making. Now I'm going to move on to question number 2 for John. So I'm just going to post it in here. Okay, so I'll read the question. In this exhibition, you have 2 different types of decals, iron colored ones and full colored ones. Can you explain the difference where you source each type of decal, and talk about what you consider when deciding what type of decal to use?
So the 2 different types of decals I've used. While I was at the University of Regina in the summer, I discovered this technique that uses laser jet printers to create ceramic decals. The toner used in certain models of laser jet printers has a very high iron content. And by printing that on a decal film paper, you can create iron decals that will transfer to ceramics and then you fire them at a high enough temperature that your glaze starts to melt and they can fuse into your glaze. They only create iron transfers, so you're limited in color to a sort of sepia type image, which I felt worked really well for this project. I did notice that, in fact, different brands of printers will create slightly different tones in color, but I'm sure that's just based on the formula of their toner. Now, the Leaving Ireland piece, I got full color decals created. And I felt that was more appropriate for this piece and what I was trying to do, and particularly with the cards that I was incorporating in the work. I wanted them to be in the actual colors they were. And I also wanted the photographs to be in a truer black and white grayscale, to have the strength to stand up against the colors. I feel if they were that slightly more faded sepia, they wouldn't hold their own against the color images. So that is a particular printer that you need to do that, which is incredibly expensive. But there are places where you can send your images away to have those decals created for you. And I've used Photoshop. I've scanned my images and then used Photoshop to manipulate them and size them and correct them, and then send them away to have those printed off for me.
Great. Okay, I'm going to type in the next question for John now. So we're going to move into some questions now about more the content and conceptual backing behind the show. So you've mentioned that when you first viewed your grandfather's photographs, emotions surrounding your Catholic faith and the Mount Cashel scandal, and the pushback from the church you had experienced in the 1980s in relation to the AIDS crisis resurfaced. How has the Mount Cashel installation helped you to work through those feelings? And has it led to new insights or feelings?
This issue here for me, I think what I've taken away is there's some points in your life where you feel helpless, where you can't do anything, and that can be very frustrating. By being able to create this work and to express my feelings, I found extremely helpful. That I've worked through some things, and it's also taking away that helpless feeling that there's nothing I can do, nothing I can't express how I'm feeling. So that, to me, in creating this work, was very, very helpful.
Great. Okay, I'll do the next question because it's hard to sort of do any more follow-ups. So we'll just move to the next one. So I'd like to read something that you said. And here it is in quotes. While in palliative care, a friend was asked where she felt she would go when she died. She responded that she would be here in the memories of those who knew and loved her. Then she would slowly move to the world of myth as stories were told about her. And finally, she would fade. Could you share with us your understanding of memory and myth and how you see this exhibition engaging with memory, myth, and the notion of fading?
I'm spending a lot of time thinking about memory these days, and mythology, and family mythology, and it's the stories we are told. I grew up in a family that had loads of stories. I never knew my grandfather, but my mother always talked about him, and I feel I know him. But of course, that's her memories of him that I bring to this, and my own memories of incidents in the 80s or different times of my life. So, and I realized these fade. The piece Forgotten was inspired by something I had heard about Kate Davis, and that was that when she was in palliative care in Toronto, a friend had asked her where she would be going after she died. And her response was that at first, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be here. I'm going to be in the memories of the people who knew and loved me, and I'll be around. She said, then there'll be a time when I'll move into the realm of mythology. It's the stories that people have told about me and will tell about me. And they're a type of mythology. And then eventually those stories will fade and I'll fade. And I really do believe that we kind of live on in those memories, and then we do move into a world where it's the stories that are told about us. And then eventually we will fade. So the piece Forgotten, I've taken old family photographs that I can't identify. They date back to the 1860s. And I don't know who those individuals are or were. And by creating an artwork with them, I'm pulling them back maybe to that place of mythology. I'm not quite letting them go. And I feel in some ways the Mount Cashel piece does that as well, with these images of young boys that were taken over 100 years ago. None of these people are still with us, and I don't know how their lives turned out. But incorporating those images, I'm pulling them back at least to the place of mythology.
Great, thank you. And one of the things, I'll just chat here for a minute, John, don't worry, I'll type the question in. Hopefully you'll get that. But when I think about this idea of the fade and then some of the conceptual backing of behind ceramics, where it becomes this moment when you fire something in clay and it turns into ceramic, where it becomes permanent and it can no longer be dissolved in water, for instance, with clay. This idea of fading that then is made permanent is really interesting. And anybody who'd like to do some further reading, there's a writer out there named Laura U. Marks who writes about radioactive fossils, which I think is very much a part of this as well. So here's my next question for you, John. Okay, so entering the gallery space with the dark walls is a bit otherworldly, and I can tell you've spent a fair amount of time thinking about exhibitions. What knowledge from working on the installation side of things at the Mackenzie have you brought to your pottery practice?
In some ways, I think my time at the Mackenzie was probably the best MFA I could have done. Working with so many different artists and curators, trying to find out what they were trying to do with their work and present it. I learned so much. And I think that's really important, how you present work. I knew I wanted the Mount Cashel piece not to be contained in a white box. I wanted in a broader, undefined space. So the focus was just on the table. And through my work in the gallery, I found that the use of that type of a gray color can help to achieve that. I didn't want to make the mantle piece a significant part of the artwork. I wanted it there as the mount for the furniture piece, but I wanted it to be much secondary to the pots. So I would have painted it the same color of the wall, whatever the wall color was, but I really found I enjoyed those pieces with the silicone glaze against that gray color as well. So I think that worked out really well. I do think there are times I like the white box, and I think there's pieces I would happily display on a white pedestal. Um, but other works for me require something that relates back to the domestic and the nature of the ceramic objects in creating. So by having the table, by having the mantle, those objects for me work better in that space.
Great. And I'll just clarify for people who we've been using this word garniture a bit. And so I'll just give just some quick definition of what that is. A garniture is a ceramic specific form of installation. It's generally 5, 7 vessels that are lined up along a shelf, sometimes a mantle. And this developed in the 17th century in china cabinets, which at the time these are collections in Europe, often of work from China and Korea. These china cabinets weren't a piece of furniture, they were whole rooms. And so you would have garnitures within those rooms where you would display things. So John's piece, Leaving Ireland, that's on the wall is a garniture because it's been designed like that. So I'm just going to put in the next question for him. And it sort of carries on with what we've just talked about. So John, I'd like to chat a bit more about framing devices, as I find your choice of table and mantle over stereotypical white cube plinths to be quite exciting. In both cases, you have used furniture with strong ties to the domestic and to the history of ceramics to frame your pots, which in turn frame your grandfather's images. For me, these choices of table setting and garniture answer the question, how does a potter deal with a collection of old photographs? Not by putting them into a photograph album, but by turning to the history of ceramics and where pots are found. My question to you now is, what's next for a potter with a collection of photographs? How do pots associated so strongly with the domestic continue to assert their potness within the white cube? Or do you also think about showing your work outside of the white cube? Do you think about your work existing in homes?
Okay. I think I kind of addressed a little bit of this in the last one, but to take it a bit further, and that's the actual objects I created with these photographs. I think I am, as a potter, very interested in ceramic history, and I'm referencing those traditions. In the piece Forgotten, the plates on the wall, I looked at a lot of sort of Victorian decorative wall plates and created my own interpretations of them that to me suited the images I was putting on them and what I was saying with the piece. I didn't try to replicate them, but do my own interpretation of it. And the same with the garniture piece. Although I'm referencing historic ceramic pieces, I didn't depict them, and probably the form may be a little more contemporary than some might be. And with the Mount Fashion piece, I'm looking at what I think might have been found on that table in that orphanage, what ceramics objects might have been there, and the style that they were in, and use that for putting my images on. So I am looking back and thinking about historic forms and traditions in ceramics. I'm trying to find the right fit for what I'm trying to say.
I'm just going to ask him one more question. Do you plan any other exhibition environments for your work? I hope he understands that. It's hard to type and say it at the same time.
Okay. What I would like to do going forward, I have basically 4 pieces now that are kind of worked out and completed. I have one last piece in this series I'd like to create, which deals with boys from Mount Cashel Orphanage who fought in the First World War. It's a very tragic part of Newfoundland history, is the Battle of Beaumont-Hamel in the First World War, where almost the entire Newfoundland regiment was wiped out. And I have pictures from boys from the orphanage that my grandfather received that were at that battle and died at that battle. I also have some postcards and letters that they wrote home. And somehow I would like to create a work, another installation piece that uses those items to honor those boys. And then I think this body of work will be completed, and I would like at some point to show all 5 pieces together. And ideally, that would be in Newfoundland.
Great. Wendy, I have one more question, but maybe should we see if there's questions from the audience?
So we have like comments, not so much questions. So thank you, Margaret, for your comments here. Yeah, so that's all we have, Julia, from the audience. So we could conclude. I could ask John a question.
I have one more, so I could
Okay.
ask that, and then
Sure.
maybe the audience can sort of, brew away and think about it. Okay, so I think, let me just make sure that, okay, John, so I've got one last question for you. So John, one last question. In terms of ceramics and especially pattern and decoration, what did you learn from your time in the Gambia, and how does it impact your work today?
Okay, you know what I learned from my time in Africa? Color. I was so enthralled by the color, pattern, decoration I encountered in Africa. And I think that's part of how I was able to move into earthenware when I came back, being a traditional stone and porcelain reduction fired potter, to go to something that gave me access to a brighter, broader range of colors was great. Also, a relationship with the environment, being in a small rural village in Africa without electricity or water or any of those things. Having to dig clay and process it by hand, and so dependent on the weather that, in the village, social events happened on the nights of full moon, because that's when there was light. When there was no moon, there was no light at night. And being near the equator, it got dark at 7 o'clock every night. There were no long days. So you became very aware of the cycles and nature. And I think I've taken that with me as well.
Great. Well, thank you. So Wendy, that's the last question that I had.
Okay, so I actually think I'm going to ask John a question that's going to follow up, and it's going to follow up on your last question. So I'll be typing that in the field. I will read it too after I type it, everyone. I'm formulating it as I type. Might be a little off, but I still want him to answer it. So my question to John is, John, you mentioned how you learned about nature in Africa. How do you relate to your pottery practice as a form of working with nature? John?
I think there's two ways. As a medium, I mean, clay is mud. How much more natural can you get than that? And when you've seen it just dug out of the ground and created important, the village I was in Africa was famous for the water storage jars they created. And water was so important. I was in the Sahel, that's the area just beyond the Sahara, and waiting for that annual rain was so critical. Was the rain going to come? Was it going to be good enough? And the ability to store water was so important. So I think as a material, I think clay relates to nature. And then I have also find sometimes in the themes and imagery, I've been very, throughout my career, interested in trees, in the sun, the moon, things that I use as icons for nature. So I think it does come through in my work. Uh, this particular piece was inspired by wheat fields. Um, so this particular body of work I'm doing right now may not have as much to do with that, but it certainly comes in themes in my work throughout my career.
And I would just think to add, while Wendy's typing there, that I really found it when I was learning ceramics, just how in tune potters and ceramists have to be with the environment. If it's going to rain, it's going to be more humid. So your pots aren't going to dry as quickly. So you have to sort of balance out the moisture differently. In Calgary, if a storm is moving in or a Chinook off the mountains, it changes how your kiln fires your pots. And so you become very much aware of what's going on outside in terms of things that you cannot control, because they will impact your work as you're working on it.
Thanks, Julia. So I think we're going to wrap up this evening. I really want to thank John. I want to thank our viewers for hanging in there with us when we're trying to manage all of our technicalities here tonight. So thank you, John, and thank you, Julia, for this evening. And I look forward to future work by John, and I look forward to following what you're up to, Julia, with your really focused interests in pottery and in ceramic practice in Saskatchewan. I would like to just let our viewers know that we have a survey that we would love you to fill out. Give us some feedback about tonight. And this helps us continue on with further programming with our people, not just locally anymore, but kind of anywhere, from anywhere now. So please do take a moment to fill out that survey. So I want you all to know that John's exhibition will be up until July 11th at Sherwood Village Branch of the Public Library, Regina Public Library, at 6121 Rochdale Boulevard in Regina. So thank you. Without much further ado, we're going to say goodnight and have a very nice, pleasant evening.